Welcome to Navigating Hope, your compass to health empowerment. I'm Dr. Jaime Hope, steering you through healthcare, overcoming overwhelm, personal goals, and emergencies. We'll navigate the healthcare maze with actionable insights and real-world advice, unlocking the secrets to a healthier, more vibrant life. Join us to take control of your well-being and make informed decisions for your health and your future. Stay with us as we unravel the mysteries of medicine, wellness, and life's unforeseen challenges, helping you bypass the ER with a dose of knowledge. Stay tuned till the end of the episode with a recap of your actionable insights and a free gift. Let's chart a course to your well-being together. Okay, everybody, welcome back to a very special episode of Navigating Hope, where I am joined by an incredible human being, an exceptionally amazing trauma worker, Dr. Don Wood. So, of course, you heard in the intro all of the amazing things that he does. Dr. Wood, let's just dive in because we're talking about anxiety and depression and trauma. And so we're going to start with the elephant in the room. So at the Inspired Performance Institute, you help people in 4 hours? You're supposed to spend a decade on the couch complaining about your mother. How do you work that? How is this even real? We want to understand what this looks like.
I think probably the best way to explain it and the reason why it's so effective is that I create the optimal conditions for the mind to heal. And traditional therapy doesn't create optimal conditions for healing. So if you go in to talk to your therapist, you're feeling stressed when you go in there, and then they start talking to you about some stressful events. Well, you never get out of that stress environment. And so the reason I use 4 hours, because by the time we're 2 hours in, I haven't even talked about a trauma yet. But the mind now is in that alpha, relaxed, focused state. And then it's very easy to reset it. It's not uncertain. It feels safe. Those optimal conditions is really what makes it work.
So you start by creating the right container. So
Yes.
getting people into that. So let's do a brief nerd out into brainwave states and physiology states so we can understand when we're in that stress state versus in a more relaxed, receptive state. Can you teach us about that?
Yeah. So what I talk about is if you have a traumatic event, your brain waves are going to be in a very high beta brainwave state, which is about 15 to 30 hertz or cycles per second. So your mind is recording every single moment of your life. So everything you've ever seen, heard, touched, or smelt in your lifetime is recorded and stored in what we as humans have as this explicit memory. Only humans store explicit memory. So no other animal does that. So if you have an event that is traumatic or disturbing, your brain's going to be recording in high beta. And so now that memory is stored in high beta. So every time now your mind researches to know how to respond to the current situation and pulls in old memory that was in high beta, your survival brain operates in the present. So when it starts to look at a memory from 5 years ago or 10 years ago in high beta, high def, when does it think the memory's happening? Right now. So it has to activate your nervous system because it believes there's a threat.
I have a completely ridiculous example about this. I have just a mild spider phobia, but I was in Costa Rica trying to help indigenous people with diseases. And so we're crossing this bridge, this specific bridge, and there is a bird-eating tarantula. So that we're talking like, it's big enough to take down a bird.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay, I can handle some daddy long legs, some Michigan spiders, but like this is too much for me. And very graciously, one of my classmates who understood that this was not that this was a real thing, and that day was not the day for flooding therapy or whatever. I was just in a 2 hour, just carried me across the bridge. I closed my eyes. He carried me well past it. Like it was fine. Hours and hours later, we get back to the same bridge. This spider has probably like who knows how far away. But as soon as I see the bridge,
Yep.
even though there's no longer a spider, I'm like climbing up this person's back. And I think that is that right? Like that's how we
That's
access these
exactly it.
memories, even if we're no longer there's no spider anymore there.
No, but your mind looks for similar and same. So that bridge looks similar to a threat. And so then it starts to pull up when the spider was there. And so when it sees the bridge, it then pulls in the memory, starts running the data in real time, and says, we're in danger. So as far as your mind's concerned, there's still a spider, and it's seeing that data. Hollywood has made trillions of dollars from this. They can convince us in a movie theater that something's real by playing something on the screen. Memory is the same way. It's like a movie that's playing in real time. And your conscious logical mind knows that it's not there. So you could sit there and go, there's no spider, there's no spider, there's no spider. But your survival subconscious mind goes, there's a spider. And it's trying to protect you, not hurt you, because it's looking at real data from a previous experience in real time. It's a glitch. That's what I talk about. It's just a glitch. So what I do and why this works is if that memory was stored in high beta, once I start taking you through the program, by the time we're 2 hours in, I've got you in a very relaxed alpha brainwave state. So the mind is now operating between 7 and 14 hertz, very relaxed, very focused. And then we bring in one of these memories that was stored in high beta, but the dominant brainwaves at this point are alpha.
So, like
So
for
it
a real
takes the
life
intensity.
example, what would it be like when because like I talked about the spider and I'm on the bridge, so I'm in beta. Like, what would a real life example in this, not in your therapeutic environment, but how could somebody know like what an alpha feels like to them or when they would be in it so they can kind of
So
correlate?
So I actually do that in the program. What I'll say to them is, I'll tell me about a time when you were outdoors, you were somewhere in nature. So I give them a reference point of what alpha is. And they'll say, oh, I was in Hawaii and I was on the mountain and I was looking at the ocean. And I'll go, that's perfect balance. That's being centered and balanced. That's the base we want you operating from. And what I do is then I bring them back to that base and I teach them how to come back there. And then at the same time, we're eliminating the high definition memory and then bringing it back into a low definition format. So the best way to explain it is if I said to you, Jimmy, tell me what you ate for dinner last night. Can you tell me what you ate for dinner?
Right, I had chicken and sauteed vegetables.
Right. So you saw pictures, right, of
I
what you ate,
did.
maybe where you ate it.
Yeah.
That's how you stored the information about dinner. But last night wasn't threatening or disturbing, so that's stored as a fairly low file. You had no problem picking it up and seeing it.
It
But
was
if that
very
was a
unstressful chicken.
That's right. Even it could have been great chicken,
It was
right?
delicious.
Yeah. But it's not a stressful event. But if that had been a stressful event, a traumatic event, now your mind's recording all of that detail in high definition in a very high beta brainwave state. And then it stores that memory. So what I do is take that high definition memory that has been stored in beta. I have you in alpha, reprocess it into alpha. And then you can talk about it because your mind's no longer seeing the threat. It's not high def anymore. So a really dramatic one to show you how it works is I had a guy, a U.S. Army sniper. He had to shoot and kill a 12-year-old boy. And so he was struggling for 8 years at the VA. They just medicated him. And so he said to me, he says, I can't talk about this anymore. And I said, I don't need you to talk about it. He said, well, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to fix it. He said, well, how are we going to fix it if I'm not going to talk about it? I said, I don't need to know what it was. I'm going to get your mind to reset that high definition traumatic memory into the low definition of what you ate for dinner last night. And then it doesn't see the threat. And so he says, and I don't have to talk about it. And I said, no. By the time we were finished, Jamie, he gave me a complete description without shaking and crying. And what he said to me, he goes, how the bleep did you do this? And I said, I really didn't do anything. I said, for 8 years, your mind's been trying to get you not to pull the trigger. The purpose of that memory, right, is your mind is calling for an action. Whenever you feel an emotion, that's a call for an action. So the purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So when you were on that bridge and you saw the spider, fear makes sense. It's a perfectly good emotion in that situation. But when you went back and then you saw the bridge, even though there was no spider, your mind was looking at the information about the spider and trying to get you to run, escape the spider. But there's no spider. So the same thing for him. His mind was trying to get him not to shoot because that would solve the problem. Does that make sense?
Wow. No, that's incredible because the way that you say that, so first of all, everybody feels like they have to just rehash everything, and that can be very exhausting and triggering in and of itself. But the way that the emotions are sending you a message. And so I've heard you talk about it almost like it's an email. You know,
Yeah.
whether it's anxiety or depression. And first of all, my email gives me anxiety because there's so much of it, and I'm behind as usual. So what does that mean? What is it trying to tell us? And then how can we get that to stop telling us the same thing?
So I talk about anxiety, just giving a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I said, think of anxiety as an email. So if an email comes in, like you just said, you get anxious because you haven't looked at the emails. But if there's an email that comes in from somebody that you're thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a problem, right? And you keep ignoring it, you keep getting it, you're going to get anxious because you're ignoring it. But if you open up the email and they say, oh, Jamie, everything's good, we took care of everything, you go, right? It was a message trying to get to you to get your attention. So all you have to do is address what the message is. The problem is not the email. The problem is the message. Anxiety is just the email. So, and the same thing I talk about with depression. So when people say to me, oh, I'm really depressed, I'll say, well, tell me what you're angry about. And they'll go, well, no, I'm not angry. I'm depressed. And I'll go, yeah, depression is most times anger. I said, so if your mind, like for example, with this sniper, he dealt with severe depression. I said, so every time he thought about it, he had an emotion of anger. Why did I do this? I shouldn't have done it. So the purpose of that anger is to get him not to shoot. But he can't do that, right? Because it's over. But his mind keeps calling for the action of not shooting. So if your mind keeps calling you for that action and you don't answer the call, how does your mind protect you? It stops using emotions. Depression. Depression is the absence of emotions. You're flat because your mind couldn't get the answer it was looking for or the action that it was looking for. So your mind's protecting you. It's actually a function of the brain, not a dysfunction.
That's one of my favorite things that you say. Because we're all taught that we're dysfunctional and we just need this pill, or we're deficient in this, as opposed to understanding that deeper level that this is serving a function, and you get to the why. Let's talk about that, because that, we're diagnosed. So if you have anxiety, which is a symptom, or like if you feel anxious, that's a symptom, and then you get diagnosed with anxiety, which seems like final. And
Right.
and so, but how do you view that very different? Like, tell me about how you view that.
That's what I started to look at because I said, why would a mind get anxious? There's no reason for it to be anxious unless there's some message that you're trying to get through. And people say to me, this is one of the things I talk about all the time. People say, oh, I sabotaged myself. And I go, it's impossible. The brain can't sabotage itself. It's survival based. Why would it sabotage you? It's trying to keep you alive. So because you're focused on survival all the time, your mind will be trying to protect you from danger. So people will say to me, well, why do I go in this other direction when life was going really well and then I go and do this stupid thing and move over here? Is because your mind's trying to move you out of what it thinks is going to be more dangerous. And it looks so that people will describe it as sabotage. And so, on a simple way, I sort of explain, just think of a young teenage boy at a high school dance, right? And he sees this really pretty girl across the room. He wants to go ask her to dance, and he's sitting there sweating, thinking, what if she says no? What if everybody sees me go across and then she turns me down? I got to walk back. She becomes a lion. And so, as he starts to get up the nerve to walk over there, he sees his friend Billy over in the corner and decides to go over to talk to Billy first. He didn't sabotage himself. His mind was like, she could kill us, right? Go over in this direction. And that's what our minds are doing for us all the time. So if you've had some experiences with failure, with pain, say in a relationship, right? And all of a sudden you think, I need to get into another relationship. And then you just keep on. How many times have you heard somebody, they get out of a relationship early, right? They break it off because their mind is saying, "Oh, this is going in a direction that we used to get hurt in." And then they'll say, "Oh, I sabotaged the relationship." Not really. Your mind tried to protect you. As long as that information about being hurt is still running in the background, that traumatic memory about your pain is going to try to use that as a way to protect you.
And What an incredible way to frame that and to really understand it, because it's the absolute truth. I mean, this is exceptionally well validated. This is evidence-based medicine that your brain is trying to protect you.
Hmm.
And so we have to understand that when you first taught me you can't self-sabotage, because I was like, gosh, I feel like I do that plenty of times. You're like, oh, what is that next layer deeper? What is that next layer of deeper? Because it's really about asking the why.
Why? Why would your mind sabotage you? I mean, nobody knows better than you, right? That the mind and body are designed to heal. If they come in to see you, all you have to do is reset it and it's going to do what it's supposed to do. It's designed to do that. But if you don't get the optimal condition to heal, right, then you may not, then something could go wrong. So if somebody came in with a broken leg and you healed it, be fine. But if they didn't come in and said, I'm just going to keep on, trying to deal with the pain, then they could end up with all kinds of other issues that come from that. And that's the purpose of getting optimal conditions for healing.
And the conditions are key, because okay, say you did break your leg. That's something that people can intuitively understand, right? The bone is broken. So we put you in an optimal situation, whether we immobilize or pin that bone. It
Yep.
doesn't make the break go away immediately, but it puts you in that condition so that it can heal. Versus if you don't get put in that position to heal and you keep moving it around and jostling it, and your bone can't create that callus, that safe container to then re-heal that bone. So
Yep.
this is about the conditions.
Yeah. So if they just said, "Oh, I'm going to tape it up and see what happens," and then all of a sudden the bone, starts to form and heal again, but it's out of place, right? And then they have a problem, right? And all kinds of things. You have all kinds of probably examples of what happens when that happens,
And
right?
every time they use it, it keeps hurting.
Yep.
And our emotions are just like that.
And that's what I talk about is an emotion. The only purpose of an emotion is a call for an action. That's why when I say that, it makes so much sense because why would your mind use fear? It's not using fear just because it wants to ruin your day. It's using fear because it says something's wrong, we're in danger, and we need to protect ourselves. And where the glitch comes in is if you think about something that happened to you from your childhood and you feel fear. It's a glitch. Your mind is looking at old data in real time and it's calling for an action that isn't possible. And then we refer to that as anxiety, depression, post traumatic stress, all of those things. And I say those are just symptoms of it. Why is the mind feeling fear? Why is it feeling anger? And your mind would never do anything to hurt you. It's trying to protect you, but it may be dealing with faulty intelligence, old data. So, and again, this is sort of a interesting way to explain it. So forget about the politics of it. So the world gets news that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, right? So everybody has it, whether it was accurate or not accurate. Let's take all that out of it. So what do? Based on the information, we attack to take him out. Then we find out possibly he never had them. So what do? We start now to blame ourselves. We start to feel guilty and shame about why did we do that? Why did we attack a sovereign nation? What kind of people are we? But how could we not have done it based on the information we had? And so when people then start blaming themselves or feeling shame and guilt, why did I do that? Why did I do that when I 10 years ago? Well, you may not have had the information you needed to rely on to make a decision, or you're dealing with some of this old data that keeps your mind thinking that you're in danger. So then you respond to it. How could you not? It's impossible not to do it. So I say to everybody when they come in, there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your mind. Let's figure out why your mind is calling for these actions and why you're dealing with anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress, even panic attacks. So we're eliminating panic attacks because a panic attack is just a combination of psychological and physical. It starts a double loop. So the psychological could start it, which then creates the physical. Then the physical pushes the psychological. Then the psychological goes, uh-oh, pushes harder against the physical. And then it just keeps running a double loop. And the mind thinks there's a threat.
And so people are responding to something that the threat isn't there like it was. And I know you've talked about, so I mean, certainly like war veterans and snipers, but I mean, you've helped athletes, you've helped people who have anxiety even just being on an airplane.
Yep. Yep.
So how did you help with that?
So again, why is it coming? So when somebody says, I have a fear of flying, then I go, why? And they'll say, well, I don't know. I have this fear of flying. Well, it's coming from somewhere. So it could be coming from maybe some accident that happened on a plane. Maybe it obviously didn't kill them, but it could have been there was a big drop in air pressure or the plane dropped or something like that. And so now their mind remembers that and stored that in high definition. And then now I'm getting on a plane again. So I had an example. I had a gentleman, him and his daughter, they were flying. He was flying his own plane, crashed it in a lake. And he ended up going through the program. And I said, how's your daughter? And he says, well, she seems fine, right? She's not seeing, she was like 9 years old. And so he says, well, if I notice something, I'll let you know. So then he calls me a few months later and said, we're planning our Christmas trip. And she's talking about why don't we stay home this year? She's making like she's not coming right out and saying I don't want to get on a plane. She's saying I think we should stay home. It would be nicer to have a family vacation at home, and that's where it was coming from. Because when she thought about now getting on another plane, her mind was going back over that data of what happened last time she got on a plane.
Wow. And then sometimes it seems kind of very like a direct situational thing. People who've been in a car crash, worry about that. People with a fear of flying, me with like a normal, healthy dislike for spiders, and then, coming across the world's giantest uh, spider. But I love how you brought up with the daughter is sometimes it manifests directly, right? You get on a plane, you start sweating, your heart's going faster, and it looks obvious. But there are some times where people have had a trauma and it manifests in other ways.
Yeah.
So,
Avoidance, staying away from things, not doing things like again, going back to relationships, then they just stop dating or going out or putting themselves out there because they got hurt.
and even so, tell me about how it can manifest in the body, in somatic symptoms, in physical illness as the body's response to those threats or trauma.
Yeah, it'll show up in different ways. So again, I believe that the think of the mind basically as the computer, the body is the printer. So what's going to happen, and this is what I talk about, it actually affects unresolved trauma affects the mitochondria in the cells, the energy in the body. So when we have this unresolved trauma, then the genes that regulate inflammation upregulate. The genes that regulate the immune system downregulate. It's an allocation of resources. So what the mind is saying is, oh, we have a threat that we need to deal with. So we need to protect ourselves so inflammation will go higher. And then the immune system goes lower because if you're being chased by a lion, you don't need to do maintenance, right? So we'll do the maintenance when we escape, but trauma keeps running, so you never escape. So the immune system stays compromised, and then it's going to show up in illnesses because now you have a weaker immune system. But if you balance the nervous system, the immune system is also balanced. And that's what trauma does. So as long as that trauma is running, it's going to show up physically in all kinds of different issues. Autoimmune in particular, a ton of autoimmune issues will come from trauma. And then the people will get, like my daughter was a perfect example. She got diagnosed with Crohn's when she was 13. They just treated the Crohn's. Steroids, they put her on anti-anxiety meds, antidepressants, and then they took out 24 inches of her intestines through 4 different operations because the cells were dying because they weren't circulating. They went into a cell danger response because as far as her mind was concerned, she was still being traumatized. And then when we resolved the trauma, right, the Crohn's went away because the inflammation went down and the immune system came up, right? And that was what the issue was. But they wouldn't describe it that way. They say there's no cure for Crohn's and we don't know what causes Crohn's. It was directly connected to her trauma.
And that's incredible because you're not saying, and nobody's saying that the manifestations of these illnesses aren't real. She had actual cell death. She had actual digestion problems. So it was very real. But the why, that deeper layer, deeper layer, deeper layer of why is her immune system off? Why is her inflammation off? That's what you were getting to.
Right. And so when she got diagnosed with the Crohn's, they said, there's no cure for Crohn's. We don't know what causes Crohn's. She's going to have to manage this for the rest of her life. Take her off of gluten, take her off of dairy, so we're doing all the things trying to figure it out, right? But there was no answer. And then they just kept doing different operations to keep cutting out different parts. And they said she'll eventually end up with a colostomy bag. That's the answer. And then she ended up with a second autoimmune disorder, idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis. Again, they said no cure. We don't know what causes it. What they actually said is she should live close to a hospital because her lungs could fill up in 15 minutes and she'll choke to death. That was their answer. And that's what set me off on looking for an answer. And that's when
And
I connected it up to the trauma,
and that was the genesis of this, right? Of how
the
you
whole genesis.
so now you have a daughter who's in mortal peril,
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
And you have taken that to create the education. You did an absurd amount of research.
Yes. Yeah.
Like absurd and education. Walk us through that process. So daughter's in mortal peril and you decide to take action. So tell us what you did.
So I started to research it and look at what other things that I'm seeing, and I started to connect it up to trauma, the ACEs study, adverse childhood experiences, and all these people who had similar kinds of issues, a lot of stuff in autoimmune. So what I did is instead of saying, oh, I guess that's what it is, you got to treat this autoimmune, I said, why would the system go into an autoimmune issue? It has to have a reason for it. It does nothing unless there's a purpose to it. I mean, I believe 80% are coming from psychological. There could be some dysfunction physically that could happen, but I think most of them are psychological. And
And
so
you're
for
not
me,
saying I want to be really clear to the people who are listening. You are not saying they're crazy and you are not saying they're imagining it.
no, no,
Neither one of those. You're saying neither one of those. You are saying this is a real thing and the underlying cause is from this.
yes.
I want to be clear for people who are listening and hear that and get offended and just blow this off because that's absolutely not what Dr. Wood is saying.
Right. So for my daughter, it was definitely the trauma. She had sexual assault between 6 and 8 that we didn't know about. She never disclosed it to us, and that's where it was coming from. So when I developed the program, as I said, I had to look at this wasn't the problem. Crohn's wasn't the problem. Crohn's was a symptom of the problem, but they treated the symptom. And the problem is that the people who are trained to deal with those kinds of issues are not really given psychological training. So they wouldn't have connected it. But my response was, I've always been an entrepreneur. So I thought, okay, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to look at for what did they miss or not connect. And that's when I started to run saying, what's the brain doing with trauma? How does the brain respond? And so then I realized that this is all a memory problem. It's all coming in from the way we've stored the information that keeps, and I never liked the word trigger. So I always use the word activate, right? Why is your nervous system activating? It's activating for a reason and it thinks there's a threat. And that's why your system, when you saw the bridge, your mind said, this could be a spider. We've seen the spider here, so we have to be prepared for fight or flight. But it wasn't accurate. It was faulty intelligence.
And kind of silly if you think about it, because I'm walking through a jungle. This bridge was like this tiny little portion. I mean, there could have been spiders in like every millimeter of this jungle, right? But in my brain, it was like, this is the one spot. It's factually faulty information, but I
Totally.
felt it every bit as real as this thing it's got to be there.
And so now if that memory was stored in high beta, and then you go back there, then the memory of that event, seeing the spider, comes back up. Your mind starts looking at it in real time in high beta. And the problem with traditional therapy is if you go in and start talking to your therapist about this high beta memory, what brainwave state are you going to be in talking to your therapist? High beta.
Oh yeah, you're going to be all like ramped up.
How do you fix beta and beta? You can't. You have to have a counter to it. And that's why I decided to use the 4 hours, because during that 4 hours, I can create the optimal conditions. The mind will absolutely heal itself. All you have to do is get it prepared to heal. And then it can look at that old data. And I have some techniques that I use to basically get your mind to reset it. And then it just does. And then you can describe the whole event without any issues. We have a testimonial of a lady on our site that had a car accident a year before. She had panic attacks. She couldn't get in the car and drive. And even if so she came in to do our program, one of our group programs. I'd never met her. I had no idea who she was. But for some reason, she decided to video herself coming in. So her husband was driving her, and you could see the fear. Her eyes are darting, even though she's not driving. She's still in fear, and she's recording herself talking about how her heart's pounding in her chest. She goes through the program, goes home that night, and then decides to go for a drive on her own and records herself. I'm backing out of the driveway. She's giggling. She's going, "There's no fear. I'm backing out of the driveway. I'm driving." And she's sort of laughing, going, "How did this happen?" And it was before her mind, every time she got in a car, what does her mind say? We get hurt, right? And it starts looking at the old data about her being hit. She got T-boned. And so anyway, once we reset that memory, we don't forget it. So we're not trying to eliminate memory. We're just trying to take the high def out of it. And then it won't activate the nervous system. That's what I figured out. A low def memory will not activate the system.
And so yeah, so you're not deleting it. We're not saying it's not real. It didn't happen. We're changing the way that we process it, metabolize it, put the different state that we're in, and now we can handle it. Now we can utilize our other system, like being rational and doing all this stuff.
Yep. But as long as the survival brain, the subconscious mind, is running that data, the logical brain cannot override it.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
All
we've all been in those situations where our logical brain is not running the show.
It has no ability to correct anything because survival, and I don't know if I shared this with you, the time slice theory is one of the things that I found when I was doing my research.
Yes, and let's chat about that because this is fascinating.
Yeah, so one of the things I found was these two scientists at the University of Zurich said, "Is consciousness streaming?" And they said it's not. The subconscious is getting it streaming, all the information, because it can multitask. It can handle a lot more detail. Your conscious mind cannot handle that much detail. So your subconscious takes in all the data in real time, processes it, and then sends pieces or time slices to the conscious mind 400 millionths of a second later. So your subconscious has already responded, and then your conscious mind gets some of the information, but 400 milliseconds later. Your subconscious has already activated the nervous system.
Right.
And so you're already in fight or flight, and the logical brain can't override it anyway. So there's nothing you can do about it. And it wouldn't anyway. And that was one of the things that I talk about when I work with athletes. So I had one of the athletes come in. His testimony is on the site. So Prince Fielder. So he's a six-time All-Star. He played for the Tigers. So you should know who he is.
Right. Woo. Yeah.
Yep. And so, phenomenal baseball player. And what I said to him is, I said, "You know that you can't think and hit a baseball?" He goes, "What do you mean? I can think and hit a baseball." I says, "You can't. It's impossible." He says, "Well, how am I hitting a baseball?" I says, "You've coded it. You have seen so many pitches come in from that height at that speed with that spin that your subconscious has all of those codes built. It knows that that ball is going to end up in approximately this area." And so before you're even thinking, your mind is already knowing where you're going to go. Because Harvard did a study, said it's actually physically impossible for a Major League Baseball player to hit a Major League fastball. How are they doing it? Because that pitcher's 60 feet, 6 inches away, throwing a ball at 95 miles an hour. You can't consciously think that fast. So that's the coding. So I said, the reason you're such a great hitter is because you've coded thousands and thousands of pitches, and you already know just that instinct. That's what makes you great at what you do, Jamie, is that you see something, you know what you know, but you're not sure why you know it. You just know it.
Well, it's been very funny.
That's the
Some of my
coding.
most famous diagnoses, like walking in the room and I'm like, that person has an aortic dissection. And they're like, that doesn't make sense. How could you diagnose it? It's because I had put in the reps and I have seen what this looks like and what it doesn't in the same way, something that we can all relate to, right? When you're first learning how to drive, you're like, hands here, gas, brake, button seat, where's the blinker? You're all these things,
You're
but
thinking.
we've coded it so much that we can drive now we don't need to be consciously thinking about that level of stuff. And so in many ways, coding is good. Now, of course, we should pay more attention when we drive. That's a separate story.
Yeah.
But we've coded that in the baseball players and the clinicians. Like you can see people's trauma. Like you
Instantly, yeah.
right. But we've also coded in some things we don't want, with spiders and bridges and fear of emails and childhood trauma and a fear of somebody who reminds you of somebody, even though it's completely unrelated. So we've intentionally coded some skills we want to learn, but we've unintentionally coded an awful lot of stuff.
And the good thing about that's a great way to explain it. The problem is we still want to keep the information about the spider or whatever to protect us, but we don't want it to activate us. So what I do is give you the best of both worlds. We don't let it activate you, but you still have the knowledge to protect yourself with the information, but you're not going to overreact. It's like,
because you don't
I
want
know
to be
how to.
stupid. You like in a dangerous situation, like you don't want to walk down a dark alley and get stabbed, right? We don't just lose our ability to make good choices.
Right. But now you're going to do it with a lot more control. So you
Yeah.
still have the data that you need for the information, but you're not going to activate your nervous system and go into fight or flight. And so you can stay calm.
And that's incredible. That was an amazing episode with Dr. Don Wood, and we're about to dive into your 5 key takeaways. This is just your friendly reminder that you have a free resource you can download in the show notes. It is your red flags and green flags for provider information sheet. This will help you find a trustworthy professional to guide you on your healing journey for whatever your health needs might be. All right, your top 5 takeaways from Dr. Don Wood on trauma and healing. Number 1, trauma is a memory glitch, not a permanent condition. Dr. Don Wood explains that trauma is stored in the brain in high definition, high beta brainwave states, causing the nervous system to react as if past threats were happening in real time. This glitch leads to anxiety, depression, and those PTSD-like symptoms, even when that original danger is long gone. Number 2, traditional therapy often fails to create optimal healing conditions. Instead of rehashing traumatic events in a stressed state, Dr. Wood's method focuses on bringing the memories and the brain into this relaxed alpha state, which is that 7 to 4 hertz, which allows for the reprocessing of traumatic memories. This eliminates their power to trigger that fight or flight response while preserving the memory itself. Number 3, emotional pain manifests as physical symptoms. Unresolved trauma dysregulates the nervous system, leading to chronic inflammation, weakened immune function, and a range of those autoimmune disorders. Dr. Wood's research highlights that treating trauma, not just the physical symptoms, can lead to profound healing, as he has seen in his own daughter's recovery from Crohn's disease. Number 4, self-sabotage is a myth. Your brain is always trying to protect you. People often blame themselves for anxiety, avoidance, or self-destructive behaviors, but Dr. Wood reframes these actions as survival-based responses. Your brain is not sabotaging you. It is reacting to old data in real time, making decisions it believes will keep you safe. And number 5, healing trauma does not require you reliving it. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Dr. Wood's approach is that patients do not need to discuss their trauma for healing to occur. Whether you're working one-on-one, in groups, or online, his method helps rewire the brain to store traumatic memories in low definition rather than high definition, reducing their emotional intensity and eliminating those triggers. So your next steps, download that red flags, green flags provider information sheet, share this episode with someone who might be struggling with trauma or unresolved emotional pain, and stay tuned for part 2, where we explore the connection between trauma and addiction and how healing one can help break free from the other. Healing is possible. Let's keep navigating this journey together with him. Thank you for tuning into Navigating Hope with me, Dr. Jaime Hope. It has been an honor to navigate the realms of health and wellness with you today. Remember, in the journey toward a healthier life, knowledge is your compass. If you enjoyed our time together, please share, like, and subscribe to Navigating Hope. Join us next week where we'll continue to empower your health journey, arming you with the wisdom to navigate life's challenges and keep the emergency room in your rearview mirror.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.